Thank you, Stephen. A number of guests duly introduced by fellows beg leave to attend your meeting. Is it your pleasure that I welcome them in your name? Thank you. Can I just welcome everyone this evening to the first meeting of the autumn programme. Minutes.
Ordinary meeting, Thursday, the 19th of June, 2025, Burlington House and online, summer soiree. Professor Martin Millett, President in the chair. The minutes of the anniversary meeting of the 1st of May, 2025 were read and signed. The following communications were then laid before the Society. The Maritime World of the Mortar Wreck by Tom Cousins and Dr. Ian Friel, FSA, FR Hists. Reconstructing 2 Habsburg-Bourbon royal weddings by Deconstructing an Adorned Print by Dr. Arlene Leiss. A Prehistoric Persistent Place at Churhill, Wiltshire by Professor Chantal Colliner, FSA. Thanks were returned for this communication. The President announced that the next meeting would be on Thursday, October the 9th, 2025, and then adjourned the meeting. A summer PIMS reception followed.
Is it your pleasure that I sign these minutes as a true and complete record? Thank you. Elections.
The following candidates for fellowship election are included in the ballot which closes on the 16th of October. Thomas Daniel Michael Ashley, Head of Cathedral and Major Church Buildings at the Church of England. Catherine Batt, Researcher of Magnetic Properties of Archaeological Materials. Julie Bond, Archaeologist, Associate Professor at the University of Bradford. John Paxton Buglas, Freelance Archaeologist, Director of JB Archaeology Limited. Eugene Chung, Computer Scientist, Digital Heritage. Timothy Clifford, Retired Art Historian, former Director General of the National Gallery of Scotland. Richard Fattorini, Independent Consultant on Rare Books and Manuscripts. Chris Ferguson, Museum and Project Director, Ad Geoffrin, Anglo-Saxon Museum and Distillery. Amy Frost, Senior Curator of Bath Preservation Trust. Tia Gigo, Lecturer in the History of Art, Materials and Technology at Linacre College, Oxford. Molly Lowell, Philanthropist, Honorary Keeper at Fitzwilliam Museum. Ramita Ray, Associate Professor, Art History, Syracuse University. William Sherman, Master Arrowsmith and Fletcher. Susan Whitfield, Historian, Professor of Silk Road Studies at the Sainsbury's Institute and University of East Anglia.
Thank you. Ballot for those closes on the 16th. So if you wish to vote, please do so. We now come to the main business of this evening's meeting, which is to hear our paper. Our lecturer this evening is Professor Caroline Dakers, Fellow, who is Professor Emerita of Cultural History at Central St Martin's University of Arts, London. So we've got a wodge of previous publications, volumes on Fonthill, on Holland Park Circle, and on country houses more generally. She's created exhibitions at Leighton House Museum on Holland Park Circle and the architect George Aitchison. Her current research is on popular view of British artists, 1850 to 1950. She's speaking to us this evening of the title Millionaire Shopping, the Collections of Alfred Morrison. Welcome.
First, I'd like to give my thanks to Lord Margadale and all the staff in the Fonthill Estate Office, especially John Darcy, who is the archivist there. Then thanks to the Mark Fitch Fund, the Albert Dawson Fund, and the Paul Mellon Centre for British Art. They have all provided grants which have enabled this book to be published. And then finally, thanks to the 17 fellow contributors, some of whom are here tonight, whose research I've plundered for this evening's talk. Alfred Morrison was one of the most important and unusual collectors of the 19th century in Britain. He amassed not just one, but a number of major collections: engraved portraits, Chinese porcelain, contemporary paintings, and sculpture from Britain, Europe, and North America. Elaborate pieces of virtu made for him by European craftsmen, autograph letters, old masters, coins and medals, and Chinese porcelain. His London and country houses had interiors of unusual and striking design by Owen Jones. The breadth of his interests reveal an unusual openness to and curiosity about cultures from around the world, while the collaborations between him and Owen Jones are unique in terms of style, cost, and the rapport between patron and designer. On my slides, you will see when many objects were sold out of Alfred's collections and where they have ended up. I make some references to modern equivalents of money earned and spent by Alfred Morrison. I've relied on the National Archives currency calculator to provide some idea of values. Alfred was the second son of the Napoleon of shopkeepers, millionaire merchant, radical MP, and collector James Morrison, dubbed at his death the richest commoner in Britain. James's fortune was self-made. He was born in a Hampshire inn and apprenticed when a boy to a haberdasher in the City of London. He turned the moderately successful Fore Street warehouse into a world-leading business, investing profits in houses, land, works of art, and infrastructure projects in the United States. His own merchant bank had a global reach, trading in tea from Canton and cotton from New Orleans. When he died in 1857, his fortune was over £4 million, perhaps some 240 million in today's values. He owned over 100,000 acres of Britain, including the estates of Basildon, Fonthill, Malham, Isla, and Hole Park in Kent. From 1831, the Morrisons lived at 57 Harley Street in London and the Fonthill Park Estate in Wiltshire. The Fonthill Park Estate was no ordinary property. The pavilion at Fonthill was the surviving wing of Alderman Beckford's Palladian mansion, Fonthill Splendens. Splendens was made redundant by the building of the astonishing Fonthill Abbey by William Beckford. The remnants of the abbey remained close by, but from the mid-1840s, they were owned by Richard Grosvenor, Marquess of Westminster. At Fonthill, once he began collecting, Alfred undoubtedly felt he was to some extent the heir to William Beckford. He acquired a number of pieces which belonged to Beckford, including the Rubens vase, which you can see on the screen. Everything about this vase appealed to Alfred. It's just small, over 18 centimeters high, carved from a single piece of agate, probably for a Byzantine emperor. It was owned by Charles V of France, then Rubens, before William Beckford acquired it. It was sold at the 1882 Hamilton sale by Samuel Wertheimer, and then in 1892, Alfred laid his hands on it. Alfred was educated at Bruce Castle, Tottenham, the progressive school established by Rowland Hill, and followed by 3 years at Edinburgh University and then 1 year at Trinity College, Cambridge. He also travelled extensively in Europe and North America, with his family and on his own. Following his father's decision to make Basildon the family's principal country home, the architect David Brandon was commissioned in 1846 to carry out major building works at Fonthill. The pavilion was doubled in size, with the addition of a tower, a portico, a servant's wing, a morning room, and a conservatory. It was turned into a desirable gentleman's country seat to rival neighbours who included the Thinns at Longleat, the Arundels at Wardour, and the Herberts at Wilton. So it was perfect for a young bachelor. In 1850, Alfred was formally offered the Fonthill estate by his father, together with the annual rental income, some £4,000, and investments in America, railways and canals in particular, which produced additional income of about £7,000. In today's money, possibly about £1 million a year. After the death of his father in 1857, Alfred's estate was confirmed and his holding in investments increased to £750,000. By the 1870s, his income tax returns suggest that his annual income had risen to £120,000. By the mid-1880s, his annual income had increased to between £130,000 and £170,000, possibly about £10 million a year income. Alfred enlarged his household at Fonthill to 7. He took bachelor lodgings in London at 34 St. James's Place, Mayfair, where he was close to the clubs of Pall Mall and the luxurious shops of Mayfair. He would become a member of the Reform Club, the Burlington Arts Club, and a founder member of the Savile Club, established for interesting men. It's important, I believe, not to forget Alfred's passion for the Fonthill estate, for the land, rural affairs, and rural sports. It was another side to his character and his life, but which is reflected in his taste for paintings and sculpture of animals. It's also clear that Alfred was not particularly interested in buildings as architecture. He wanted spaces in which to display his ever-growing collections. However, he didn't engage George Devey to design new cottages on the Fonthill estate. Devey also enlarged the approach walls to Alderman Beckford's great Palladian archway, making them both higher and grander by adding 2 massive rusticated stone piers carrying enormous urns. The enlarging of the entrance to Fonthill was, of course, adding to Alfred's own stature. Devey's commissions, just before he was at Fonthill, including buildings for the Duke of Sutherland at Clifton and Baron Rothschild at Mentmore. So Alfred was also engaging an architect with social credentials. A theme that persists through Alfred's collecting is his interest in images of the great and the good, to influence his choice of paintings and sculpture, coins and medals, engraved portraits, and autograph manuscripts. This portrait of Queen Henrietta Maria is most likely to be the first Old Master that he acquired, and he bought it in 1852, before his father died. He bought it from the dealer and print seller Walter Benjamin Tiffin when it was attributed to Philippe de Champagne. The provenance of Bronzino's portrait of Cosimo de' Medici is just what would appeal to Alfred. It was commissioned by the Duke to be hung in the Museo of Paolo Giovio on Lake Como. It was sold by the Giovio family in 1860 to Prince Napoleon Jerome Bonaparte, residing first in the Palais Royal in Paris and then in Claridge's in London. Alfred paid £341 6 shillings in 1872. And the early portrait of Elizabeth may have been in the Esterhazy collection before being acquired by Alfred, and is now believed to be by George Gower, Elizabeth I's sergeant painter. Marseille Middleton Holloway of 25 Bedford Street, Covent Garden, and his son Marseille Holloway were the first main dealers to help build Alfred's collection across a number of areas. They acquired the Bronzino portrait for him. They bought contemporary paintings and sculpture on his behalf. Their major input was Alfred's collection of engraved portraits. By 1868, When Holloway Jr. catalogued the collection so far, it comprised almost 3,000 engraved portraits. By Alfred's death, he owned many thousand more, most helpfully carrying his collector's mark, AM, on the reverse. And now scattered across the world, a fair number can be found in the British Museum, the Fitzwilliam Museum, and the Metropolitan Museum in New York. In 1872, Alfred lent a number of his portrait prints to an exhibition marking the opening of the new Guildhall Library in London. Lending and cataloguing are regular features of Alfred's habits, the latter in particular allowing us to understand the size and the quality of his collections. His obsession with famous men and women is revealed most strongly through his lifetime collecting of autographed manuscripts. This also began in the 1860s, and by his death in 1897, he had well over 7,000 individual items. They included the sheet of Leonardo da Vinci's. He acquired autographed manuscripts of Michelangelo, letters from Jane Austen to her sister Cassandra, letters and documents of and about Horatio Nelson, Emma, and Sir William Hamilton, and the very last letter written by Mary Queen of Scots before she was executed. The Royal Commission on Historical Manuscripts was deeply impressed by the collection, and they described it in the language of moderation as the most remarkable gathering of historic autographs ever formed by a single private collector in Great Britain. The Holloways bought on his behalf in the 60s and 70s, and his main dealer in the 1880s was Alphonse Thibodeau, who also catalogued the first 3 volumes. Eventually, there were 13 volumes, including full transcriptions, details of provenance, and relevant historical events. While the volumes were expensive to buy, Alfred also allowed scholars to visit and study the original manuscripts. The vast collection remained almost entirely intact until the First World War, when it was sold by Alfred's widow through Sotheby's, and examples are scattered in libraries across the world and probably in a lot of private collections. The letter of Leonardo da Vinci finally found its way to the Morgan Library in New York in 1986. The Fonthill archive reveals a number of other dealers involved in acquiring prints and watercolours. Thomas Whitehead of Duke Street in 1865 sent in his invoice for watercolours of a dead jay and the wing of a kingfisher by Dürer, now identified as Hans Hofmann's wing of a blue roller, for £250. And this rare drawing of Nonsuch Palace by Joris Hofnagel for a further £50. And the Nonsuch drawing passed to the V&A fairly recently for, I think, £1 million. Alfred was not avant-garde in his choice of paintings by living British artists. His preference was for paintings shown at the Royal Academy, for landscapes and seascapes, and animals, both domestic and wild. And he was gratified to be asked to the Academy banquet as a patron of contemporary art, as well as a lender to the winter exhibitions there. But his obsessive, and perhaps we would call it addictive, personality is evident. He returned to the same artists again and again, especially John Brett. Alfred eventually owned some 30 paintings and sketches by him. Their friendship began in 1864, when Alfred paid 250 guineas for a painting rather than the £250 on the price tag. Brett wrote to him, "Hitherto, I have found people mostly forget what a guinea means and pay £1 instead. But you, on the contrary, have sent me guineas when I only asked for pounds." He paid £600 for this painting, very large, Christmas morning, 1866, about 40,000 in today's values. And interestingly, about twice as much as he paid for the Bronzino. In the 1840s, Alfred had spent some time traveling across America, Canada, even Cuba, on business for his father's merchant bank. He returned briefly after his father's death, and in early the 1860s, he acquired a number of paintings by members of the so-called Hudson River School. And here is one of a dozen works by Jasper Jasper Cropsey, which Marseille Holloway bid for him at a sale in London. It had been shown at the Royal Academy the year before, 1862. Alfred had himself taken the steamboat up the Hudson River from New York to Albany and was commented on the beauty of the trees in the fall and the scenery around the White Mountains. There is often a personal connection to be found in single pieces in his own collection. Holloway also acquired 2 busts by the American sculptor Hiram Powers in the 1860s. Powers had a flourishing business employing 6 carvers full-time in Florence to produce replicas for the London market. So these were extremely popular, whereas the paintings were quite rare to be bought by British collectors. Alfred's large collection of coins and medals provided him with further images of the great and the good. And this medal is especially rare, the very first coronation medal of any English royal. It was struck by the Tower Mint in 1547 to mark the coronation of Edward VI. It's 6.5 centimeters in size, in circumference, and engraved by Henry Bass, goldsmith and chief engraver at the Tower Mint. Alfred undoubtedly enjoyed owning small, delicate, finely crafted objects to hold and to admire. Among his collection of intagli, camei, and rings was this extraordinary Etruscan scarab, depicting, if you have a magnifying glass, and I don't know how well you can make it out from the room, Ajax wearing a crested Attic helmet, carrying a shield with the head of Medusa on it, approaching a crouching Cassandra, nude apart from a mantle wrapped around her legs, crouching below a statue of Athena. Hardly a pleasant image, as Ajax is about to rape Cassandra, but maybe you can't really see. Alfred began collecting Chinese porcelain in 1861-2, possibly first acquiring a large quantity of pieces direct from Henry Locke, who'd been involved in the sacking of the Summer Palace in 1860. He spent a further £40,000, well over 2 million in today's values, in just 5 years, acquiring hundreds more pieces, mostly through the dealer Durlacher in Bond Street. Alfred's collection of porcelain is now perhaps the most well-known of his collections, linked now to extremely high prices. The butterfly vase to the left was sold at Christie's in 2008 for over £5 million. The porcelain is also linked to sensitive questions of ownership and loot. Alfred's shopping spree at the 1862 International Exhibition in London was a key moment in his collecting career. He relied on the jeweller Robert Phillips of 23 Cockspur Street as his intermediary, and it is the firm's 6 pages listing his purchases that reveals the range of Alfred's interests and sometimes bizarre choices. The exhibition also provided introductions for Alfred to the enamellist Charles Lepec, possibly to the Damascene craftsman Plácido Zuloaga. It also brought together the furniture maker Jackson and Graham, their designer Owen Jones, and Alfred. Alfred himself spent over £7,500 there, some £500,000. He was never limited by borders. He bought a large number at the exhibition of items from India, textiles, boxes, rugs, and watercolors, including this of Alwar. He bought paintings by Russians, Norwegians, and Belgian artists. The shopping list included very large and very small items. Antoine Louis Barye was the greatest French animalia sculptor of the day. The full-size bronze version of Theseus and the Centaur, costing Alfred £250, was placed on the lawn in front of Fonthill House. And Alfred eventually went on to own 6 bronzes by Barye. And then he also bought the much, much, much smaller Bull and Bear by Isidore Bonheur, and a bronze of a bull by his sister Rosa Bonheur. Philip's introduction to the French enamellist Charles Lepec led to dozens of purchases and commissions, also a close friendship. Alfred naming a bedroom at Fonthill, Lepec. The identifying of some of the enamels has proven a challenge over the years, particularly with constant name changes in sales catalogues. In 1864, the female figure in La Fantasy was described as a wild female redskin riding a chimera. By its sale in 1899, it had become an African figure on a dragon. It's most likely Alfred was introduced to the expert in Damascene work, the Spaniard Plácido Zuloaga, at the exhibition, or certainly very soon after. Some 6 years later, Alfred's list of works by Zuloaga for him included an enormous chest, 2 vases, 2 small coffers, a dagger, a light holder, and the top for a cane. More commissions followed. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Damascene work, it is the technique that involves inlaying gold, silver, and other metals into an iron surface, crafting an intricate decorative effect. This massive 8-foot-high ornate cabinet by Fourdenois was the most expensive item that Alfred bought at the exhibition. It was £1,400, or almost £100,000. At the exhibition, Alfred had seen and bought the work of Jackson and Graham, furniture makers. He'd also lent a design by Owen Jones for a dairy at Fonthill, commissioned by his father, but never built. Now he approached Jones to work with Jackson and Graham to decorate Fonthill House and to provide display cabinets of ebony inlaid with ivory for the imperial porcelain. Alfred's initials, AM, were inlaid in ivory on the lower parts of each of the cabinets. AM would appear on many of Alfred's commissions, even on the firebacks in his house in Carlton House Terrace. Owen Jones, invited to Fonthill to design the cabinets, was meanwhile profoundly influenced by Alfred's Chinese porcelain, a fact he acknowledged in his publication, Examples of Chinese Ornament, which came out in 1867. By the early 1860s, we can see that Alfred had established his interests across an extraordinary range: Chinese porcelain, engraved portraits, old masters, contemporary paintings and sculpture, enameled objects of virtue, autograph manuscripts, coins and medals, all being acquired at the same time. He rarely sold anything. He just went on for the rest of his life, acquiring more of the same. He was, of course, very rich. It was hardly surprising that he had serious space issues at Fonthill. In 1863, he applied for a lease to number 16 Carlton House Terrace, one of the last dwelling houses of the first class, designed by John Nash, to be built adjacent to the former site of Carlton House, the luxurious residence of the Prince Regent. The first western section of the terrace had been completed by 1833 to Nash's designs. However, the eastern section was not completed until 1864, an interval of more than 30 years, by the contractor Samuel Morton Peter. And if you know the ICA, that's immediately below the terrace on the slide. And the arrow marks Alfred's house. Owen Jones, together with Jackson and Graham, was given the entire interior to decorate and to furnish, work that lasted from about 1865 to 1870. The Moorish ceilings were made of fibrous plaster and molded in deep relief. The technique had been developed by the Parisian Leonard Alexandre de Sacy and patented in 1856. The process involved making up a mixture of plaster, oil, and glue, strengthened with sheets of coarse hessian and pressed into molds. The molded sections could then be fixed into position with the help of wires embedded into the canvas, and the finished moldings painted in colour. The carpets at Carlton House Terrace were designed by Jones with patterns to match the ceilings. Just imagine what it looked like. Patterns to match the ceilings. Walls were lined with coloured Lyon silk, mostly to Jones' designs, again, to match, to reflect the ceilings and the carpets. So this is the ceiling of the library on the ground floor. And this, the ceiling of the drawing room on the first floor. And here you can see the overmantel of the chimney piece in the library, and the cabinet made to match, which was of ebony, purple heart, holly, and sycamore. The magazine of art critic who visited commented that the marquetry had a character of its own and is possibly the apotheosis of machine-made marquetry. It is so accurately produced as to almost overpower one with a sense of hopelessness of escape from never-ending precision. And here is a view of the chimney piece in the first floor drawing room. Charles Lepec spent 2 years making the exquisite enamelled fire surround, which was undoubtedly influenced by Alfred's Chinese porcelain. The chair by Jones is of mahogany with veneers of mahogany, purple heart, ebony, harewood, and hollywood. And the upholstery in this room was described at the time as being of silk, of a mingled purply colour, a sort of heliotrope with red, light blue, and gold. The piano was in the drawing room, the case designed by Owen Jones, made by Jackson and Graham to contain the Erard piano. Everything in the house was designed to match: ceilings, woodwork, wall coverings, carpets, furniture. It was an excess of richness and pattern, even without the insertion of Alfred's collections. The dominant colours of gold, purple, green, amber, silver, pinky grey, heliotrope. In 1866, at the age of 45, Alfred decided to get married. He was obviously concerned about who was going to inherit his collections. He chose Mabel Chermside, 18 years old, the daughter of the rector of Wilton. The age gap, 27 years, was considerable. Alfred was, however, very rich, and Mabel was an unusual young woman. She'd spent part of her childhood in Paris with her grandfather, Sir Robert Chermside, physician to the English embassy and the personal doctor of the elderly Marchioness of Hertford. Mabel's father was named after the important collector Richard Seymour Conway, 4th Marquess of Hertford, whose illegitimate son established the Wallace collection in London. Mabel gave birth to 5 babies in the first 7 years of their marriage. 4 survived, including 2 boys, an heir and a spare. In 1870, the family moved into Carlton House Terrace, its decorations completed. Mabel joined Alfred's collections. There were 16 servants, plus, of course, Alfred and Mabel. Very quickly, 4 young children, Hugh, Archie, Dorothy, and Catherine, all moving around inside this large house, absolutely crammed with objects, every surface decorated or laden with treasures, everywhere pieces of exquisite craftsmanship and high value. Around 1874, Mabel became virtually bedridden. The few clues to her physical condition suggest a gynecological problem, perhaps a prolapsed womb. She'd begun to pursue her own cultural interests, ancient jewellery, needlework and lace. She joined the Council of the Royal School of Art Needlework, but she was forced to retreat into the background, remaining an invalid for about 12 years. Her influence on Alfred's collecting is still the subject of speculation, but she took a serious involvement with the revival of the lace industry in Ireland and was a major collector of Renaissance lace. In the delicate enamel portrait by Charles Lepec, completed soon after her marriage to Alfred, her blue veil and the neckline of her dress trimmed with bobbin lace, reflecting her own interest in lace. By the early 1880s, both houses were clearly becoming completely choked with objects. And here you can see the large conservatory or morning room on the side of Fonthill House. And you just make out that it's full of sculptures and large Chinese pots, like the one in the photograph, very large Chinese pots. Alfred tried to get permission from the Crown Estate to build 3 galleries on top of his London house. When he was turned down, he engaged the architects Gordon and Lowther to design 3 top-lit galleries to be added to the back of Fonthill House. Photographs were taken in about 1891, the only photographs of the inside of Fonthill House and of Alfred's collections in situ. So they were really, really important to all the contributors to the book on Alfred. And here you have to begin to imagine color. This is the saloon, which was primarily devoted to Chinese porcelain and contemporary sculpture. Also 18th century French furniture. The walls were covered with a boldly patterned wallpaper of blue and white, chosen by Mabel. In the center of each wall, you can see large draped mirrors which enhance the apparent size of the room. You can make out some of Alfred's engraved portraits of famous men and women, framed and hung on the walls. And at the far end, Chinese porcelain plates arranged on large plaques covered in crimson velvet. The chandeliers in all the galleries are early works by W.A.S. Benson. And also note the sculpture at the end by the Italian contemporary sculptor Stefano Galletti. The picture gallery was closely hung with contemporary paintings and pieces by Zuloaga. And again, think color, the Zuloaga gold and silver damascene glittering in candlelight, and the lights from the Benson chandeliers, and then the paintings on the walls lit in that way. It's really quite difficult, I think, to get a sense of the color that would have been in these galleries, because the photographs are, of course, in black and white. And if you think of that, I just showed you that one with a Zuloaga writing desk on the left side, and there it's a shut box. Okay. Here it's open. 44 drawers in it, undoubtedly made specially for Alfred's collection of coins and medals. And this is another view of the saloon. I've already referred to Alfred's interest in his country estate and how this spilled over into his collection of paintings and sculptures of animals. So here at the far end, you can make out Giovita Lombardi's sculpture of a goat and kid, now of all places in Sefton Park in Liverpool. And the vase is known as a soldier vase, about 52 inches high, dating from the first part of the reign of Qianlong Emperor in about 1740. The marble throne, Alfred had 4 of them, is a further indication of Alfred's interest in pieces from India. And then barely visible in that earlier slide, on a chest in the front right of the photograph, is the bronze ostrich frightened by a lizard by Julius Heinrich Harnell, one of 11 pieces Harnell acquired from Alfred. They included a giraffe, a dromedary camel, and a group of hippopotamuses. Indeed, Harnell's pieces form the largest single group of works by any sculptor in Alfred's collection. Let me just go back and see if you can spot them on the front right on the cabinet. Is the ostrich frightened by a lizard. So large and small. Once Alfred fell for an artist, Harnell, Lepec, Zuloaga, John Brett, he wanted pretty much all their work, or so it seemed. In the music gallery, it's possible to make out John Brett's painting Christmas Morning, which I showed you earlier, above the fireplace on the right. H.W.B. Davis's painting A Panic of charging cows at the far end, and some of the fine objects of virtu on the tables, bottom left. including this beautiful coupe by Charles Durand. Davis was regarded as the heir of Landseer. A panic was shown at the Royal Academy in 1872, 8 feet high and 16 feet wide. One of the largest paintings of charging cows in existence, I believe. Alfred bought this and several other paintings by Davis, also his sculpture of a trotting bull, which he placed in the hall of Carlton House Terrace. A panic was hanging in the music gallery when Philip Burne-Jones, son of Edward Burne-Jones, painted Alfred's portrait in the early 1890s. He was unimpressed by Alfred's taste, but it is worth bearing in mind that he, Philip Burne-Jones, was writing to a member of the Wyndham family, patrons of Philip Webb, William Morris, and Rossetti, hardly comparable to the duo of Owen Jones and Alfred. So this is what Philip Burne-Jones wrote to a member of the Wyndham family. Their gallery of pictures was the most depressing thing of all. I had never quite realized what unlimited wealth, combined with bad taste, could achieve. Do you remember that vast canvas of life-size cows coming full at tilt at one, with a thunderstorm raging in the background? It got on my nerves, and I wondered whether my portrait would look like the cow picture when it was done. But they were kind and hospitable, and everyone needn't have good taste, need they? Alfred died on the 22nd of December, 1897. His estate was valued for probate at just under £1 million, possibly about £78 million today. Immediately after Alfred's death in 1897, Christie's was engaged to choose items to be deemed heirlooms and consequently labelled as such. The heirlooms selected were old masters, Chinese porcelain, coins and medals, and a small selection of objets d'art, including pieces by Zuloaga. Not contemporary paintings and sculpture, not furniture, even designed by Owen Jones, apart from the cabinets at Fonthill for the Chinese porcelain, not enamel work by Charles Lepec. Alfred's widow, Mabel, with the permission of the family, immediately disposed of Carlton House Terrace and large chunks of the collection, more than was needed to pay death duties. There were a total of 22 sales between 1898 and 1906. The question arises whether Mabel, only 50 when widowed and living another 36 years, had actually hated many of the objects which she had been surrounded by. No correspondence, however, survives between her and Alfred. There is no evidence why she sold up. So here I've just selected a few items from Alfred's collection to reflect journeys taken after his death. When Mrs. Howes visited Carlton House Terrace, she described this as a very curious old ivory statuette of the angel of death, riding forth, scattering the seeds of pestilence and famine as it goes. Alfred had acquired it in 1865 from the dealer Abraham Joseph for £325. At the 1899 sale, it was called merely an equestrian figure with outspread arms and flying drapery. It was just 17 inches high, carved by the master of the Furies in about 1610. It was eventually acquired by Rainer Winkler, the world's most important private collector of ivory in the 20th century, whose collection is now in Frankfurt. Some of Alfred's collections found their way to his two daughters. The Fairy Fella by Richard Dadd, now in the Tate, passed to Alfred's daughter Catherine Gatty, and by her to the poet Siegfried Sassoon on the occasion of Sassoon's marriage to her daughter Hester Gatty. In 1963, Sassoon gave the painting to the Tate in memory of his friend and fellow officer Julian Dadd, a great nephew of the artist, and of his two brothers, who all died in the First World War. Alfred had acquired Richard Dadd's Contradiction in 1870 Marseille Middleton Holloway bought it for him for 135 guineas. When it was hanging in Carlton House Terrace, it was described by a visitor as a painting of unhealthy nightmares. It wasn't sold at Alfred's death, but acquired by his younger son, Archie, and hung for a while in Basildon House. Archie had acquired the Basildon estate from his bachelor uncle, Charles Morrison. When Archie sold the contents of Basildon in 1920, it was described as an in-tempera drawing by Richard Dodd. By the 1950s, it was on display at the Royal Hotel Scarborough. It was most recently sold by Christie's in 1992 and bought by David Mason for Lloyd Webber for £1,650,000. Archie at Basildon also had Summer Moon by Frederick Leighton. Alfred had bought it in 1872 from the Royal Academy. It's the only example of aesthetic art that Alfred appeared to have bought, and I suspect he bought it because Leighton was president of the Royal Academy at the time. It was sold in 1920 from Basildon to the famous cricketer Ranjit Singh, the Maharaja of Nawanagar, and is presumed to be somewhere in his palace in India. It has never been seen since, which is why you have a slightly blurry slide of it from the Strand magazine. Here, we see the extraordinary table clock commissioned by Alfred in 1881 from Bapst and Lucien Feliz, made of silver, enamel gold, hard stones, rock crystal, amethysts, and diamonds. This remained in the family until 1938, when it was sold by Alfred's grandson, John Granville Morrison, for £65, 2 shillings, wrongly attributed at the time to Plácido Zuloaga. It was sold again in 1955 for $5,000 and then bought by the Metropolitan Museum in New York in 1991. The Met now has an interesting mix of pieces owned by Alfred, enamels by Lepec and a watercolor by John Brett. The Cassone is a monumental piece made by Zuloaga for Alfred. It weighed over a ton. It was 9 foot long by 3 foot. The magazine of art critic at the time, on seeing it in the drawing room in Carlton House Terrace, said it was to be gazed at. To use it would entail much trouble on the user. It was moved down to Fonthill and eventually sold in 1971, when rising taxation forced John Granville Morrison, by this time the first Lord Margadale, to sell off much of Alfred's remaining collections. And by this time, fortunately, the collector Sir David Khalili had become interested in the work of Zuloaga, so became the owner not just of the Cassone, but many other pieces that were once on display in Fonthill and Carlton House Terrace. The Morrison family hung on to many pieces of the Chinese porcelain right through into the 21st century. The sales then of Alfred's Chinese porcelain at Christie's in 2004 and 2010 became headline news, and Chinese collectors took back treasures looted, possibly, from the Summer Palace. Alfred's Fonthill House was demolished in 1921 after a new Fonthill House, designed by Detmar Blow, was built elsewhere on the estate by his son. The display of sculptures in front of the old house languished in the long grass. The massive bronze sculpture of Theseus and the Centaur by Bari was stolen. The 2 enormous iron-winged lions by Ferdinand Barbedien survived in situ until the 1970s, when one was stolen. Another, before going to Crowther's to be sold, was copied by a Wiltshire landowner in concrete. This remains part of a pair in his garden. However, Harnell's crouching lioness and a marble eagle with wings outspread were eventually moved to the comparative safety of the gardens of yet another Fonthill House. To conclude, Alfred undoubtedly had an addictive personality, acquiring not just one painting by an artist, but every painting he could lay his hands on. buying not just a few pieces of Chinese imperial porcelain, but several thousand, and so on. His obsession with famous men and women, acquiring their autograph letters and their images in old master paintings, engravings, coins, and medals, may suggest a need for status in society. He also published catalogues of his engravings and his autograph letters, and lent pieces by Lepec, by Owen Jones. He lent coins and medals, and he lent paintings to exhibitions. Again, was this about making his mark as a collector of taste? One of Alfred's obituaries sums him up well. In London, he was a man of high cultivation and an accomplished Maecenas. In Wiltshire, he was a model squire and a perfect country gentleman. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. That was absolutely breathtaking collection. Few things take my breath away, but the taste of some of that stuff is extraordinary. I'm very, very interested in the phenomenon of these collectors. How was it used? Was it just there, and were people brought in to see it, or was it just for him?
He was certainly allowing scholars writing biographies to come to look at his own autograph letters, and then they thanked him in letters back. So he was very open to scholars coming. Because he was a member of the Burlington Fine Arts Club, he was lending things to their exhibitions. He was mixing there with other collectors, members of the Rothschild family, for example. So he was sharing information. He was also in touch with not just dealers, but people in museums. There's one letter from somebody at the V&A alerting him to a sale of, I think it's some Indian textiles, saying, we've got no more space at the V&A, do you want to buy them? So there was this back and forth in this world of dealers, of collectors and scholars.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So it's a closed circle.
Yeah, and I think just to add, I mean, I don't know really what he was like as a human being, as a husband, as a father, I have no idea. But he certainly had these very, very close friendships with particular craftsmen, painters, and other collectors. So his closed world was one that he relaxed in, I think.
Thank you. That's questions or comments from the audience?
Thank you very much. It's a fascinating range of objects and activities. I'd like to ask one very specific question and then raise a different one. The scarab that you showed appears to be part of a handle or part of some other object.
It was attached to a ring.
A ring?
A 19th-century ring. Ah. That's how it was. I don't know whether, I mean, I don't know if he actually wore it, but I mean, that's how it was. Yes. It was held and handled. And that's what it's looking like at the Getty collection. It's got a ring.
Fine. The other thing that, I mean, it looks so out of place when all his extensions to the Fonthill House are balanced. Mm. They extend in a balanced way. The tower is an absolute invasion of that. Now, with some architects, one could understand it because they Gothicize the windows and so on. Not so here. Was he an advanced introducer of water throughout the house? Mm. Because that might explain the tower. And was he also introducing gas, electricity, and so on as it came along?
The tower was added to the house just before Alfred was given it by his father. So David Brandon was the architect. David Brandon worked very closely with Wyatt, T.H. Wyatt, who was responsible for Wilton Church in the 1840s. Wilton Church, if you look at it, has a tower that's very similar. So my assumption is that the tower was borrowed and adapted by the architects from Wilton, which was very close to Fonthill, is very close to Fonthill. So I think the tower itself, you know, has a reference to another building in the area. I think there was gas in Tisbury, which was a few miles away. I mean, we don't really know, there's no detail about how either house, London and in the country, were lit. I mean, there's reference to, you know, gentle light, soft light. The candelabra could have been using oil. So we don't actually know. Electricity, I think, was brought into Fonthill House, but not until after the First World War, and then very soon after it was demolished. And the London house, I think there wasn't electricity there before 1897 when the house was disposed of. So, but that's the sort of area where, you know, there aren't those handy letters that explain, you know, that the light's good or bad, or, you know, we're giving up on candles and we're moving over to gas.
Thank you, Caroline. Wonderful talk. Lots of information and ideas there. Sorry? Okay. What your thoughts are about what holds all this together. So there's a small amount of royal stuff, the coronation medal and portrait of Elizabeth, the Gower, that we now think is Gower. And then there are things from many, many different places. Do you think what holds this together in many instances is that post-Great Exhibition fascination for what new materials can make or do? I mean, there's obviously that, but I'm having to work hard here to think, well, you know, it's the Rothschilds and it's French stuff, and most collectors, it's certain kinds of Renaissance collection, but with him, it seems so varied. I wonder what you, as the scholar of this, think really motivates him to think what he thinks, how it's all of a kind.
He didn't have to work. He had a large income. He'd traveled. He had spent time in Italy, in France. We don't know about Spain, certainly the States. He was a very curious man. His letters show that he was very curious, always visiting other houses of rich men and seeing what they had. I think he was competitive. I think he wanted what other people had. I think he wanted to, he didn't want to be tied down to one thing. I mean, he's not a Rothschild because he's buying so much contemporary art, and he's also a patron of contemporary artists and craftsmen. It's almost like he really does want to be this sort of, total collector, patron, connoisseur, knowledgeable, speaking foreign languages. I think what really holds it together is his love of glitter. You know, there's a lot of these objects are just beautiful to see, to hold. They glitter. They are detailed. I did wonder sometimes if he had terrible eyesight, because these small items, you know, you want to come close to see what's on them. So it's detail, it's glitter, it's fine, fine work. On the other hand, there's also this theme of famous men and women. I mean, the collection still has a lot of portraits of, Elizabethan, early 16th, 17th century figures whose names change all the time. I don't think he failed to get into Parliament. He tried twice. He was a free trader. He was a liberal. He was a member of the Reform Club. He wasn't willing to bribe enough to get in, because that's the way you did get in at that time. He was quite shy, apparently. Apparently a terrible public speaker. So he's sort of back, in a way, it's what you were saying, it's back in this self-created world of objects. But he wasn't alone in that world, because he shared it with other connoisseurs, and he shared it with the craftsmen. I mean, you know, I have this idea of him walking around the 1862 International Exhibition. He's lent the drawing by Owen Jones, which he owned. He's there with Owen Jones. They're sort of walking around, looking at things together. You know, that he made friends of some of the people he patronized. Does that help at all? It's very difficult, very difficult. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's collecting the world in a way. He's sort of bringing it all in and forget wife and children. You know, he's bringing all this together and sharing it with fellow experts.
Thank you very much for a fascinating paper. And thanks to you and your colleagues for following through on these collections and where they're coming from. The question and where they are now and what that tells us about the kind of material it is. But only in answer to the last question have you used the words competition or competitors. And I guess it might help us to understand if he's bidding against other people when he's using these craftsmen or these dealers, or who would be the competition, as you mentioned, that would also be bidding at this material, or has he just cleaned it out of the water?
So I don't think he actually went very often to auctions himself. He used people like the Holloway father and son to bid or to alert him to what was coming up, to send him a note, because he survived, with a list of things he might like to buy. He goes and looks at them and then they bid. There are very few references to him not getting things. By competitive, I think I was really meaning when he latches onto an artist or a craftsman, he doesn't want anybody else to own their work. He's keeping it. You know, there are various books you can read on, you know, collecting and addiction. And I think Baudrillard talks about the seraglio, you know, that he's sort of bringing in this, creating a harem with all these objects in it. He wants everything by John Brett. He wants everything by Charles Lepec. That's the sort of way his competitiveness comes through. It is interesting that he doesn't seem to go after very expensive old masters, which maybe Richard Wallace would be going for. You know, so he sort of keeps his budget. Although he's got so much money, he wants to buy lots of things. You know, he doesn't want to buy one great old master. So he lets that go and buys slightly cheaper Bronzino, or the cheaper Elizabeth I, you know. But the competition, I think, is owning the quantity coming out of his chosen group.
Sincere thanks to Caroline for an absolutely spellbinding talk. Thank you so much.
Can I just say as a quick word that the book, if you go online, it's free, downloadable. UCL Press books are all free online so that scholars around the world can all read them. It is a large book.
Thank you. I give notice that the next meeting will be on Thursday, the 16th of October, when we will hear a paper, West African Communities Past and Present, seen through the Nigerian and British Museum collections, by Professor Abu Bakar Sani Sule. Meeting stands adjourned. There is a reception outside. Please join us.